Perhaps most importantly, after the economy collapsed, people lost their savings, many people lost their jobs. Even those that still had jobs often did not get paid for months, and when they were, the value of their wages was destroyed by hyperinflation. But there were no foreclosures, no evictions. Municipal services such as heat, water, and sometimes even hot water continued to be provided, and everyone had their families close by. Also, because it was so difficult to relocate, people generally stayed in one place for generations, and so they tended to know all the people around them. After the economic collapse, there was a large spike in the crime rate, which made it very helpful to be surrounded by people who weren't strangers and who could keep an eye on things. Lastly, in an interesting twist, the Soviet housing arrangement delivered an amazing final windfall. In the 1990s, all of these apartments were privatized, and the people who lived in them suddenly became owners of some very valuable real estate, free and clear. Switching back to the situation in the US, in recent months, many people have reconciled themselves to the idea that their house is not an ATM machine, nor is it a nest egg. They already know that they will not be able to comfortably retire by selling it or get rich by fixing it up and flipping it, and quite a few people have acquiesced to the fact that real estate prices are going to continue heading lower. The question is, how much lower? A lot of people still think that there must be a lower limit, a realistic price. This thought is connected to the notion that housing is a necessity. After all, everybody needs a place to live. Well, it is certainly true that some sort of shelter is necessary, be it an apartment, a dorm room, a bunk in a barrack, a boat, a camper, a tent, a teepee, a wigwam, a shipping container. The list is virtually endless. But there is no reason to think at all that a suburban single-family house is in any sense a requirement. It is little more than a cultural preference, and a very short-sighted one at that. Most suburban houses are expensive to heat and cool, inaccessible by public transportation, expensive to hook up to public utilities because of the long runs of pipe and cable, and require a great deal of additional public expenditure on road, bridge, and highway maintenance, school buses, traffic enforcement, and other nonsense. They often take up what was once valuable agricultural land. They promote a car-centric culture that is destructive of urban environments, causing a proliferation of dead downtowns. Many families that live in suburban houses can no longer afford to live in them and expect others to bail them out. As this living arrangement becomes unaffordable for all concerned, it will also become unlivable. Municipalities and public utilities will not have the funds to lavish on sewer, water, electricity, road and bridge repair, and police. Without cheap and plentiful gasoline, natural gas, and heating oil, many suburban dwellings will become both inaccessible and unlivable. The inevitable result will be a mass migration of suburban refugees toward the more survivable, more densely settled towns and cities. The luckier ones will find friends or family to stay with. For the rest, it would be very helpful to improvise a solution. One obvious answer is to repurpose the ever-plentiful vacant office buildings for residential use. Converting offices to dormitories is quite straightforward. Many of them already have kitchens and bathrooms, plenty of partitions and other furniture, and all they're really missing is beds. Putting in beds is just not that difficult. The new subsistence economy is unlikely to generate a large surplus that is necessary for sustaining the current large population of office plankton. The businesses that once occupied these offices are not coming back, so we might as well find new and better uses for them. Another category of real estate that is likely to go unused and that can be repurposed for new communities is college campuses. The American four-year college is an institution of dubious merit. It exists because American public schools failed to teach in 12 years what Russian public schools managed to teach in 8. As fewer and fewer people become able to afford college, which is likely to happen because meager career prospects after graduation will make them bad risks for student loans, perhaps this will provide the impetus to do something about the public education system. One idea would be to scrap it and then start small, but eventually build something a bit more on par with world standards. College campuses make perfect community centers. They're dormitories for newcomers, fraternities and sororities for the more settled residents, and plenty of grand public buildings that can be put to a variety of uses. A college campus normally contains the usual wasteland of mowed turf that can be repurposed to grow food, or at the very least hay, and to graze cattle. Perhaps some enlightened administrators, trustees, and faculty members will fall upon this idea once they see admissions flatlining and endowments dropping to zero without any need for government involvement. So here we have a ray of hope, don't we? Moving on to transportation. Here we need to make sure that people don't get stranded in places that are not survivable. Then we have to provide for seasonal migrations to places where people can grow, catch, or gather their own food, and then back to places where they can survive the winter without freezing to death or going stir-crazy from cabin fever. Lastly, some amount of freight will have to be moved to transport food to population centers, as well as enough coal and firewood to keep the pipes from freezing in the remaining habitable dwellings. All of this is going to be a bit of a challenge because it all hinges on the availability of transportation fuels, and it seems very probable that transportation fuels will be both too expensive and in short supply before too long. From about 2005 and until the middle of 2008, the global oil supply has been holding steady, unable to grow materially beyond a level that has been characterized as a bumpy plateau. An all-time record was set in 2005, and then after a period of record high oil prices, again only in 2008. Then, as the financial collapse gathered speed, oil and other commodity prices crashed along with oil production. More recently, the oil markets have come to rest on an altogether different bumpy plateau. The oil prices are bumping along at around $40 a barrel and can't seem to be able to go lower. It would appear that oil production costs have risen to a point where it does not make economic sense to sell oil at below this price. Now, $40 a barrel is a good price for U.S. consumers at the moment, but there is hyperinflation on the horizon thanks to the money printing extravaganza currently underway in Washington, and 40 could easily become 400 and then 4,000 a barrel, swiftly pricing U.S. consumers out of the international oil market. On top of that, exporting countries would balk at the idea of trading their oil for an increasingly worthless currency and would start insisting on payment in kind, in some kind of tangible export commodity, which the U.S. in its current economic state would be hard-pressed to provide in any great quantity. Domestic oil production is in permanent decline and can provide only about a third of current needs. This is still quite a lot of oil, but it will be very difficult to avoid the knock-on effects of widespread oil shortages. There will be widespread hoarding. Quite a lot of gasoline will simply evaporate into the atmosphere, vented from various jerry cans and improvised storage containers. The rest will disappear into the black market, and much fuel will be wasted driving around looking for someone willing to part with a bit of gas that's needed for some small but critical mission. I'm quite familiar with this scenario because I happened to be in Russia during a time of gasoline shortages. On one occasion, I found out by word of mouth that a certain gas station was open and distributing 10 liters apiece. I brought along my uncle's wife, who at the time was 8 months pregnant, and we tried to use her huge belly to convince the gas station attendant to give us an extra 10 liters with which to drive her to the hospital when the time came. No dice. The pat answer was, "Everybody is 8 months pregnant." How can you argue with such logic? So 10 liters was it for us too, belly or no belly. So what can we do to get our little critical missions accomplished in spite of chronic fuel shortages? The most obvious idea, of course, is to not use any fuel. Bicycles, cargo bikes in particular, are an excellent adaptation. Sailboats are a good idea too. Not only do they hold large amounts of cargo, but they can cover huge distances, all without the use of fossil fuels. Of course, they're restricted to the coastlines and the navigable waterways. They will be hampered by the lack of dredging due to the inevitable budget shortfalls, and by bridges that refuse to open, again due to lack of maintenance funds. But here, ancient maritime techniques and improvisations can be brought to bear to solve such problems, all very low-tech and reasonably priced.